Professor Morrison's visit here has been at the invitation of the government of Antigua and Barbuda, and I would like to welcome as well very warmly his wife, Dr. Faye Whitbourne Morrison as well, and a special welcome as well to his colleagues from the University of Technology, Dr. Elaine Wallace, the University Registrar, Hector Wheeler, the Associate Vice President for Advancement, Professor Hermie Hewitt, Associate Dean, College of Health Sciences, and Dr. Sean Moncrief, the head of the School of Pharmacy. A special invitation was extended to a number of sporting organizations, and I see representatives of many of them here. I want to extend a very special welcome to Senator the Honorable Mervyn Richards, who has joined us, and Dr. Rodney Williams, and many officials from different sporting organizations. I want to say a special welcome to those viewers and listeners who have joined us via ABS Television and ABS Radio, and by extension those who are viewing via the World Wide Web. Professor Morrison and his team arrived here on Sunday evening, and over the last 3 days they have engaged in meetings with the medical benefits representatives, medical benefits scheme representatives. Today they met with the Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of Health. They have also had meetings with the Honorable Prime Minister, the Honorable Dr. Jackie Quinley Andrew as well, the Minister of Education, and they have had discussions with us at the Government Assisted Technology Endeavor Gate. This evening's lecture is under the aegis of the Human Entrepreneurship and Assistive Resource Technologies Project, which the government has embarked upon, and we are likely to provide newer and additional details in the coming days. Professor Morrison and his team have also interacted with representatives of the Antigua State College and have interacted as well with local telecommunication providers executives, and tomorrow they will be meeting with alumni from the University of Technology. There are several alumni in Antigua who would have graduated from the University of Technology. There is no doubt that the emphasis on technology has leapfrogged many countries, many of them developed countries. And Professor Morrison, who is an endocrinologist and a diabetologist, and literally a phenomenon in his own right, would have taught many doctors at the University of West Indies, where he rose to the rank of Pro-Vice Chancellor. Following that, he was appointed President of the University of Technology of Jamaica. So it is clear then that the government of Antigua and Barbuda, under the leadership of the Honorable Dr. Baldwin Spencer, has a very keen interest in seeking partnerships with those individuals, those companies, those universities, those institutes of higher learning that can help us to also leapfrog our developmental processes here in Antigua and Barbuda. No man is an island. No island is unto itself. We live in a very small global village, and where there are lessons to be learnt, we want to be good students. And where we want to impart our knowledge here in Antigua and Barbuda, we welcome listeners, as it were. So against this very brief and simple introduction, and prior to my fully introducing Professor Morrison, tonight's lecture is under the auspices of the Honorable Prime Minister, and I would like to invite him at this time to offer a few remarks. Prime Minister.
Thank you very much, Eddie. May I recognize my colleague, Minister Mervyn Richards, and also, of course, Minister Mansour, the delegation, ably led by Dr. Morrison and his dear wife from the University of Technology, all you people present here at this lecture, those of you in the listening and viewing audience. I'm delighted to be here this evening to listen to Dr. Morrison as he speaks on a very interesting topic: why do Caribbean athletes excel? And I'm sure that you will be waiting with great anticipation in seeking to find out what are some of the secrets behind that success. But quite apart from that, Dr. Morrison's visit to Antigua Barbuda at this time is extremely important, because the whole idea is to be able to develop synergies with UTech that would redound to the benefit of Antigua and Barbuda. Of course, UTech sort of operated under the shadows of UE for quite some time, but I think since Dr. Morrison became president of that institution, I think he has done a marvelous job in bringing UTech to a point where that institution is now a very highly recognized as an important educational institution in the Caribbean, addressing a range of very interesting disciplines and areas of important developmental interests to Caribbean people. And when we look at the emergence of that institution and what it is doing, particularly in important areas of science and technology, we recognize that the opportunity does present itself where Antigua and Barbuda can benefit and that we can develop these synergies. His presence here also is very much part of the efforts of our Ministry of Telecommunications, Science and Technology, ably led by Dr. Mansour and his great team, in rolling out various areas of activity as it relates to the whole issue of science and technology and the role that that is going to play in the transformation of Antigua and Barbuda, and to create an environment in which we are very much in line with what is happening in the technological world, and that we are seeking to place our people at the cutting edge of the technology. And so we have rolled out the gate, and we are now in the process of rolling out HEART, as is pronounced there. And the whole idea behind these things is to make sure that technology really and truly becomes at the doorstep of every home in Antigua and Barbuda. Everyone who is interested in getting involved and getting into the technological age will have the opportunity to do so. Whether you are physically challenged, whatever the situation is, opportunities are being created so that you can become relevant. This is a dynamic situation. Things are happening in technology literally on a daily basis, and we have to keep up with those changes, and we have got to make sure that we are there and thereabouts. And I'm quite sure, sorry, that Dr. Morrison will speak to you as he seeks to make the connection between why Caribbean athletes excel and the role of science and technology and what is happening to us in the Caribbean. So I want to welcome the delegation to Antigua and Barbuda once again. I'm looking forward to hearing Dr. Morrison on this topic. But more importantly, we are very, very delighted to have the delegation here, and as we work together to develop a synergy that I'm quite sure will benefit Antigua and Barbuda going forward. Thank you very much. Welcome, Dr. Morrison.
Thank you very much, Prime Minister. It gives me great pleasure now to give you a very brief introduction to Dr. Morrison, who is an outstanding Jamaican and son of the Caribbean soil. He is a physician, a professor, a pioneer, and frankly speaking, a phenomenon. He is the holder of MD and PhD degrees and has been bestowed with the Order of Jamaica. He is a Fellow of the Royal College of Physicians of Glasgow in Scotland, a Fellow of the American College of Physicians, and a Fellow of the Royal Society of Medicine in the United Kingdom. In 1992, at the University of the West Indies, he was appointed Professor of Biochemistry, and in 1994, Professor of Endocrinology. In 1999, he was made Pro-Vice Chancellor and Dean, School for Graduate Studies and Research at the University of the West Indies. In 1993, he founded the University Diabetes Outreach Program, the UDOP, which now hosts the largest annual international diabetes conference in the Caribbean region. Since 2007, UDOP includes diabetes-related activities in the UWI, the University of Technology, and Northern Caribbean University, all of which are located in Jamaica. Professor Morrison is also the co-founder and honorary life president of the Diabetes Association of Jamaica. He's the co-founder and executive member of the Diabetes Association of the Caribbean. He's also an advisor to the Pan American Health Organization, PAHO, and has served on several editorial boards of international journals. He continues to maintain an active research interest in medicinal plant extracts and their potential for therapeutic application, and has authored over 200 articles in peer-reviewed learned journals. In 1997, he received the Vice Chancellor's Award of Excellence for outstanding achievements in research and distinguished service to the UWI and the wider community. Amongst several international honors, he received the Harold Rifkin Award from the American Diabetes Association in 1998 for outstanding and distinguished services in the cause of diabetes internationally. In 1999, he received the Gold Musgrave Award for outstanding services in the medical sciences, as well as the National Honor of the Order of Jamaica OJ in 2001 for distinguished services in biochemistry, medicine, and the voluntary social services. In July 2006, he received the Queen's Gold Medal to the Commonwealth through the Royal Society for the Promotion of Health for his services in medicine and medical education throughout Jamaica, the Caribbean, and internationally. In 2012, Professor Morrison was awarded the Honorary Doctor of Laws degree from the University College of the Caribbean for years of sterling service in the fields of education and the medical sciences, and for extensive pioneering research in diabetes. Also in 2012, Professor Morrison was invited to chair the National Innovation Awards Steering Committee, Ministry of Science, Technology, Energy, and Mining in Jamaica. Professor Morrison's activities emphasize volunteerism, and he has served both locally and internationally on several non-governmental organizations, such as chair of the International Diabetes Federation North American region and chair of the Council for Voluntary Social Services in Jamaica. In 2009, he was inducted as a fellow of the Jamaican Institute of Management, and he has been holding the post of president of the University of Technology Jamaica since March 1st, 2007. Please help me to welcome Professor the Honorable Dr. Errol Morrison to speak on the topic, Why do Caribbean Athletes Excel? Please help me to welcome him.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Good, good. Minister Mansour, Prime Minister Spencer, members of government, some of my past students, friends all, it's good to be here, and within a matter of a few days, it's good to be back on the stage. Last time we were here, we spoke of the science and technology and innovation, so important for national development, so important for putting our countries in the cutting edge of development on the path to developed status. This evening, however, we want to speak to a phenomenon that has raised the profile of the Caribbean region beyond imaginable levels. And in the area of track and field, where we are now the superpower and where we have achieved unimaginable heights, we want to share with you this evening a story based on scientific evidence and information, but which is woven around certain interesting concepts which we will share and I trust may evoke a number of questions. But in the final analysis, when all is said and done, why is it that one individual excels more than the other? There are a variety of reasons which we will explore. But let me tell you from the outset, the short answer is we don't know. But we have some ideas. And what we will do this evening is to look at what we think are three of the main axes that contribute to excellence in sports. Track and field, of course, is our main area this evening. We think the matter of genetics. There is some inheritance, what you may call the raw talent. There is the matter of the fuel, the energy that we put in. There's no point in building a massive sports car, yet you haven't got the right fuel to allow it to perform. And then thirdly, the preparation. Because even with that raw talent, even with that fuel input, one has to be prepared. One has to have the proper developmental approach to ensure that one will be at one's best. And then at the end, I want to put a little twist to the tail of all of that. That is for non-communicable diseases. What does this, why is this here? What place does it have in the scheme of things? Later on that. Look at this table. Even if you're not able to read it from where you are, what it is saying is a history of excellence in performance in the sprints worldwide. And all of these distances, from the 100 meters through the 400, the 5,000 meters through to the marathon, every one of these distances is maintained in terms of the gold medal by members of African ancestry. West Africans in the short sprint, East Africans and some North Africans in the long run. Why? Why this dominance of the Africans? From the West in the short sprint, from the East in the long run. And we feel that genetics must be a major contribution. Is that so? Let's look at what it is we know about this. The genome, the structure of that part of the cell which determines what we look like, the inheritance of the individual. This is a very complex structure. And as you know, only recently, within the last few years, we have been able to determine what the total genomic structure of man looks like. There are some 20,000 to 25,000 genes that direct the formation of protein, which is what muscles are consisting of. And in that 20 to 25,000 genes, there are numerous differences, millions of differences between any two persons, even if they come from the same family. The world is at our feet. People of different ancestry in the north, in the south, in the north, in the south, in the east. People of different performances. And we in the Caribbean here constitute an interesting conglomeration of peoples. Let us just hearken back briefly. I'm not an historian, but let us hearken back briefly. And let us remember the triangular trade which took West Africans across the Atlantic to the West Indies, and the return in goods to Europe, and the return of empty frigates to continue this movement. Oh no. When they come to the West, forgive me, when they arrived at the West, there, because of the horrific nature of the journey, only the strongest survived. The slave markets. Based on the selection process of where they were deployed, only the best were selected. The so-called eugenic effects. And based on the endurance of the practices, only the fittest survived. Now, I say that to say, look at what we're seeing here in the last table in Beijing, the table of 2008 of the awards of medals. Look at the mega countries, 300 odd million, 200 odd million, United States, Russia. Jamaica, number 3, with just under 3 million. Amidst these giants, gold medals, silver. So in terms of track and field, this little country, Jamaica in particular, has been punching well above its weight. Why so? We tend to think that it started in 1952 when the Helsinki Olympics resulted in our success in the 4x400 meters relay. And here you see the lineup of the fellows who made history in still Jamaica, that was part of the British Commonwealth, but running for the first time as a pre-independent country, Herb McKinley, Arthur Wint, George Roden, Leslie, a world record in the 4x400. This is not to negate the achievements of others like G.C. Foster in the 1920s, who was not allowed to run for Jamaica, but who, in some of the post-Olympic races, were beating the gold medalists. So in the 100 and 200s. So already we were beginning to raise a certain amount of awareness amongst the athletic population that something was happening in this little country. By the 1960s, coming from the 50s through to the 60s, we had another schoolboy phenomenon called Dennis Johnson, who equaled the world record of the 100 yards dash 3 times. His 9.2 was wind-aided and was not recognized. But he went to study in North America under the then renowned coach Bud Winter, and brought back with him in the 70s some specific methods of training that have taken root and have spread across the methods of our preparation, and is what we believe has contributed to the camps that we now have, that have produced an Asaph Powell, a Usain Bolt, a Shelley-Ann Fraser, and others. Then came 2007, when Asaph Powell raised the bar to the world record holder of the marquee event in track and field, 100 meters world record holder. Incidentally, he was a student at UTEC at the time, and gaining from, again, the methods that Dennis Johnson introduced there at UTEC. Then 2008, and you recognize he who now rules the roost in the 100 meters. 9.58 in Berlin. And that is the current record. Athlete, coach. Now then, I showed you that not for the contrast, but I want you to look carefully at this man. He's actually frontal, but let us get down to a little bit of the genetics that has given him that physique. I took a little time to outline that historical movement. Not because I wanted to remind you of the slave trade, but because that movement across the Atlantic concentrated the genetic pool from the peoples of the West Africa into the West Indies, as we call it, and into the North American continent. And what we are seeing as a result of that possible intermarriage now, and that concentration of the genetic pool, are 4 major anatomic features which contribute to speed in running. The long limbs, the narrow hips. And the important thing about the narrow hips is you're focusing the power in that drive, because the broader hips which you see in the Asiatics and in the Caucasian people spread the power, but with the narrow you're able to focus the drive every time the foot hits the ground. The black athlete has low subcutaneous fat, so there's not much in the way of drag that will, hold him back, so to speak, as he attempts to move forward. In addition, he has a shallow thoracic cage, and compared to the Asiatic and the Caucasian runners, he breathes much faster. He's breathing much faster. And what is the advantage of that? You may recognize this person here, right? In 2006, along with a colleague, we put together an interesting concept. And I'll just read this, for it has a little bit of detailed scientific explanation, but just a moment. In the uniquely lethal West African malarial environment, individuals with sickle cell trait possessed a significant selective advantage. Although sickling is caused by a single amino acid substitution in the hemoglobin molecule, we will argue that the mutation triggered a series of changes in the body, which incidentally had favorable athletic consequences. Why did we get into this? Harken back to the 1968 Olympics, Mexico City. For the first time, the lineup for the 100 meters final had only individuals of African descent. And studies on this group, you might remember the great Thomas Smith and those group. That was the cadre of individuals. And studies by scientists from Laval University in Canada on all of those fellows, bar none, every single one of them had sickle cell trait. And they wondered, is this of any importance? You know, sickle cell affects nearly 18% of the black population of the Caribbean. And it is that condition which we wonder, how is it that these athletes of such superb achievement could have that disabling condition and yet do so well? Sickle cell in its minor form is referred to as hemoglobin AS. A is for the normal and S is for the sickle. But what is happening here? Because of the sickle component, the blood cells cannot carry the oxygen well, so there's a poor oxygen uptake. But also as a result of that, there's a quick release because it doesn't keep the oxygen well. Further, the black athlete breathes faster. So he's picking up the oxygen poorly, but releasing it quickly. He's breathing faster, so he's oxygenating his tissues better. That's the final outcome of that set of conditions. He's oxygenating his tissues faster and better than the Asiatic, than the Caucasian competitors. Now, one of the key things that has been determined is that in running fast, that knee lift is pivotal. As Dennis Johnson tells you, run tall and relaxed and lift those knees high. And when you lift them high, then the pounding that comes with the sharpness of the pelvis. But look at what we're seeing here as well. This is the spinal column. The black athlete, the Asiatics, and the whites. A genetic difference in terms of the angle between the hip and the knee, where the quadriceps muscles perform. This is a more direct line of sight between the hip and the knee. The line of sight, And this is about shallow angle, giving almost a pull up on the bony tissue there, and making the performance of the knee lift not as effective in this category with the shallow angle compared to this grouping with the sharper angle. So the knee lift in the black athlete is yet an advantage. His faster breathing is yet another advantage. These are the anatomical differences which we can see and obviously measure. But there are those who think that there must be a gene that makes you run fast. Now, there are only a few genes, about half a dozen of them, which have been identified as being associated with athletic performance. And we, from the University of the West Indies at the time I was there, got involved with the group, based on the book that we had just written about sickle cell and so on, got involved with some researchers at the University of Glasgow, and we've been looking at genetic profiles in Englishmen, in Kenyans, in Japanese, in Australians, and in Jamaica. The actinin 3 gene, the angiotensin converting enzyme, or the ACE gene, and despite all the studies on about 200 or more athletes, we have not found that these, compared to the normal population, show any difference in our athletes. These are the big two. And what we so far have been trying to identify is, could there be any difference in their expression in these athletes who have been doing so well? To date, nothing specific. We have studied this. We have looked in detail. And all you're seeing here is when you compare the sprints right across the females, the overall groupings, and the long distance runners, etc. This is really just a graph showing a similar profile. By and large, there's just one, not of any real statistical significance that wasn't appearing in our female sprinters to any significant degree. But by and large, this is a homogeneous picture, irrespective of whether they were running fast or they were running long distances. The genetic makeup in these, the actin 3 in particular, the most popular that is being studied, nothing different from the normal population. When you take a sample of the muscle, you cut across it and look at it under the electron microscope to see there must be a difference between, these good athletes and these non-performing athletes. Again, these are just stains, but this is the long distance marathon, this is the short distance super bolt. No real difference between the fibers that we are studying. And in Jamaica, the team at UTech, combined with our visiting professor from Glasgow, did the first ever biopsy on the muscles of a past Olympian, Michael Frey. How age doth change us, eh? Michael Frey, and there in the operating theater, they took a sample of his muscle, and alas, there was nothing unusual compared to the normal population. And these are just complex slides studying other genes associated with athletic performance, and what they're really saying, there's nothing different from the normal population. The Jamaicans, the Kenyans, nothing different from the normal populations. So we have not been able to demonstrate that so-called elusive gene that we think will allow us to run fast. And the genetic specialists will tell you that even when you start studying these genes, unless you're going to be studying at least 20,000 to 100,000 cases, your data is not statistically reliable. We have not gone more than a couple of hundred. So it is, because this is very expensive, very time-consuming study. But the information so far has not been supportive of any difference. And Professor Yanis Pitsilades, our colleague, wrote a book on why white men can't run. And he looks at the dominance of the Kenyans and the dominance of the West Africans. And again, he summarized no genetic evidence found to date. Genetics may not explain the phenomena that we're seeing in this supremacy of the black athlete in worldwide competition. And as Professor Pitsilades summarized, just that. The genetic studies on the elite distance runners from Kenya and Ethiopia and the elite sprinters from Jamaica, USA, and Nigeria do not find that these athletes have anything special in their genes. Rather, they serve to highlight the high degree of genetic diversity amongst ethnic groups. It is unjustified, therefore, he says, to regard ethnic differences, racial differences, in sporting success as genetically mediated. To justify doing so, one must identify the genes that are important, and up to now, we have not been successful in discovering that. So the genetic story has not come up with the gene, but it has shown us certain physical attributes. The height, the chest wall, the hip. I don't know if you have that here, but you see that curvature in the hip. In Jamaica, it's called a cock bottom. And when I discuss that at home, that is all that the newsmen could find, the cock bottom. All right? Nonetheless, and if you think that's unusual, take a good look again when you see these athletes. Look at Shellyan. Look at Bolt. If you go back, it was most exaggerated in Flo Jo. You remember, anybody here remembers Flo Jo? It is an extraordinarily cocked bottom, you know? But nonetheless, that is the physical structure that we have seen. What about the diet? You know this. Yeah. Everybody took it as a tremendous joke when in Beijing someone asked Bolt what it is that he eats. He said he likes chicken nuggets, but his mother said it's a yam that he used to eat. And they said, you know, jokingly. But let me just point out something. At the University of the West Indies, we have a team of biochemists who lead yam research worldwide in conjunction with some German and some scientists in Chicago. And the scientific information about yams rests in that group. And it is interesting that yam is a staple diet. And outside of Nigeria, it is the most cultivated and eaten in Jamaica. Although we're all part of the Caribbean, it's interesting that Jamaica is really the yam-eating country of the West. Why am I making so much fuss about yam? In studying the yams, we found that they have a particular chemical component called diosgenin. A part of a group, a lot of these chemical structures are part of a group called the sapogenins. Diosgenin, just bear with me a little bit on the chemistry here, is a big molecule which is the precursor of the anabolic steroids. The testosterones, the progesterones, and those analogs known to drive the growth of muscle tissue. It is also the precursor of cortisol group, which promotes sugar production in the body. And it is also the precursor of the female anabolic steroid, the estrogens. Now, yams are eaten as staple diet from young. This is just some chemical structures just to show you that they sort of resemble cortisol that increases your blood sugar, testosterone, and all the derivatives. This is the fellow that they abuse in terms of trying to take steroids to push development. These are builders of muscle. And they are all derivatives in the diet, that is, and in these particular yams, you have about 750 different strains of yam. So it just so happens that much of the yam products in the Jamaican context are rich in these particular precursors. When you compare, it's called phytoestrogen in its broadest context. Compare them with other foods that one eats from time to time. You'll see that various nuts, even bread and bread products, soy milk. Look at these, some very minimal levels. If you can't see from the back, 0.0. There's a 3.8 there in flaxseed. They don't eat much of that here. Soybeans, 1. Bread, 0.1. Continuing, the wine, 0.0. Coffee, 0. Beans, 0.1. Cabbage, prunes, broccoli, green beans, 0.0. Garlic, cereals, 0.1. Yam extract, 4. 4. Significant. And what we are saying in this context is that this exposing to the very young as they grow, we shall advance the hypothesis that that stimulus for the growth of the muscle is very much being contributed to by the staple diet of yams. That is not the whole story. Look at what is happening in yet another staple, green bananas. Green bananas, you recognize this, eh? The reason why I ask is, in Europe and even in North America, when I show this, afterwards they ask, is that the same thing as ripe bananas? And they never knew that you could eat the green variety, right? In the green, it is a veg. When ripe, it is a fruit. Interesting staple. It has specific chemicals called phytates. And the phytates are rich in phosphate. 6 of them. And what phosphates do in the body, they are the currency. They are your EC dollar, right? They are the currency of energy. All energy for producing action in muscle goes through phosphates. And these phytates, what is happening is they're called the inositol hexaphosphates. They phosphorylate, that is, they add a phosphate to a substance called creatine in muscle. And when that happens, you get creatine phosphate. And creatine phosphate in turn acts on another substance in muscle called ADP to give it a final phosphate, which is the energy in muscle. There's a whole lot of biochemistry here, but just summarizing, when muscle contracts, it uses the energy. And the end product is this. So you can regenerate the energy by the creatine phosphate. Creatine phosphate gives it the phosphate there. And when this creatine phosphate delivers the phosphate, it in turn is regenerated by the phytates. And the phytates in turn come from our staple diet in large measure. Mind you, we're not saying that this is the only mechanism, but this is one that we have studied and we understand. This is saying it in yet another way, how the energy is obtained in the muscle. And when you look at phytate content, many of you, oats, 9.4, wheat bran, 30, almonds, 12, cashew, 18, going on down, brown rice, 125. The Chinese are coming. We need to watch that. Plenty of phytates. Flakes, yam, 6.37. Amongst the contenders, white flour, okras, cereals. And look again at these foods. Green beans, cabbage, prunes, tea, wines, etc., almonds, zeros. In green bananas, which we're eating daily, 21.3. Significant. Not as good as the brown rice, but significant nonetheless. And it's part of our almost daily diet. So when I finished, again speaking to some journalists about the potential for these steroid molecules from the yams and the phytate phosphates from bananas, which can contribute some of that dietary component, some of that nutrition, which combined with the anatomy can help to give us that extra performance. The headlines that came out the next day was yam and bananas. So again, they just have not taken to the concept that the very foods that we eat daily may very well have a secret that can contribute to the performance that we see. And then, having looked at the genetics and looked at the dietetics, what about the athletics? And this is the athletic training that we speak of. Now, Jamaica is possibly the most sophisticated country in the world in terms of how it prepares its athletes from infant school, competitive training, coaching, teaching and technique, encouraged in the eating patterns and training. What is happening? These are youngsters here in primary school, competitive. They are now pulling, right? It's a demand on those young sprint muscles, what you call the quick fibers or the fast twitch fibers in muscle. And what we're saying is, if you have this kind of organized activity from that early, pulling because of the training that is going on, and you have a diet rich in these steroids, not to the level of abuse, it's small, but daily. That is providing the push. So the well-known push-pull mechanism in nature is being invoked here, in the sense that the diet is pushing the development of these muscle fibers, in particular the fast twitch, and the pull, because everybody wants to run like Bolt, or in the good old days, Herb McKinley, or a Don Quarry, or a Hazley Crawford, or a Kim Collins, or, Nova Kirani. Everybody wants to run. So the push-pull mechanism is being invoked. Secondary school, it can't. And as you know, the Jamaican secondary school championships, now in its 104th year, is the most sophisticated and organized track and field schoolboy competition anywhere in the world. And when this is housed at the end of every March All the paparazzi from the world over are in Jamaica. Good tourism season. So look, what we're saying then is there is enhanced musculature. Enhanced musculature because of the preparation technique. Enhanced musculature because of the dietary staple. And enhanced musculature, again, from the inherited physique. And it takes them through the developmental phases from childhood through high school, through college, to national representation. And you know this girl. She just graduated from UTech last year. And not a commercial now, but I must tell you that all the speedsters that you're now seeing, whether in the Glen Mills camp, where Bolt, Johan Blake, Warren Ware, and those are, or in the Stephen Francis camp, which has remained at UTech, it has all come out of the bowels of the institution that I lead, the University of Technology, Jamaica. Bolt was there as a young student, and what is interesting, not knocking them now, as soon as the earnings began, Bolt, Asafa, Nesta Carter, they all dropped out of school. Yet our girls, Sharon Simpson, Shelley Ann Fraser Price, have all gone through and received their degrees. Shelley Ann got an upper second in child and adolescent development, and she now is taking a couple of years out to make some dunza and plans to return to do her doctorate in child psychology. So these are happening right there. And what I put together, which I had the audacity to call Morrison's hypothegram for athletic advantage, is we're looking at the biomechanical advantages, the little fat, the long limbs, the narrow hips, all mechanically demonstrated to have their effect. There is an enhanced fast twitch muscle fiber based on the discussion of the diet and the preparation. The coaching, the sustained training, all these contribute. Combined with the biochemical now, that's the biomechanical, and the biochemical, the increased oxygenation of the tissues, okay? And the increased production of sugar in the body, contributing to the energy from your phytates, as well as from your contribution of the phytosterols that produce, as one of the breakdown products, the cortisol. It is that combination, biochemical and biomechanical, that will lead to the superior athletic performance. Summarized differently, we're saying the same thing here, just simpler put. And so it is that context that we think the dietetics, the athletics, the genetics will have contributed to the supremacy of our athletes in the Caribbean, and in particular, the Jamaica phenomenon. But I wouldn't leave you without a little twist in the tail. Phytosterols, we just talked about how good and helpful they could be in stimulating the muscle growth. In adulthood, eating plenty yams can lead to the production of the cortisol and the anabolic steroids. So sugar gets high, fat deposition will set in, it damages the ability of insulin to work, and diabetes sets in. There are many an athlete who, having completed his athletic career, comes down with the affliction of the diabetic picture. In addition to that, these combination here coming from, again, these diets that we are having, hypertension, heart and blood vessel disease, thinning of the bones, and increased suffering and death. Byproducts of the phytosterols of yams and related products. Other outcomes associated with these are thought to be increased prevalence of prostate cancer. In the Caribbean, Jamaica in particular, we have the highest incidence of prostate cancer in the world. Many of our young women have what you call fibroids, which again is coming from the stimulus from the C21s and the C18s, that's the estrogen, fibroids. Many of our young women in their 20s, 30s are taken down with these uterine fibroids. And so the high prevalence of world-class athletes, which our dietary staples may help to support when young, may turn around to be the engendering of the non-communicable diseases like diabetes, high blood pressure, overweight, growth cancers when older. Jack Mandora, as we say at home, me not choose none. And so I thought I would have just shared with you some of these concepts around what could possibly be underlying the whole phenomena that we see. As I said, these are pulling together a variety of scientific information and putting a story together as to how it could happen. But in the final analysis, the short answer is, we don't know. Thank you so much for listening.